let's talk about what exactly is happening in the pharmaceutical and the healthcare space. We have Neha Manpuria, who's a senior analyst, India Pharmaceuticals and Healthcare, BofA Securities, joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Neha, for joining us on ET Now. And what's the sentiment like when you talk about the entire pharmaceutical space, the healthcare space? Because globally, a lot of rhetoric, especially when you talk about tariffs.
Thanks for having me. So on pharmaceuticals and healthcare more broadly, I would say obviously the year started off very choppy, particularly for pharma around the news with tariffs. Then it proceeded with executive order on pricing. So it's been a fairly, let's say, news-heavy space in the pharmaceutical side. But I think we've seen, particularly because Indian companies are more focused on generics, the news there has probably sort of faded away. If you look at the stock price movement, it's not as bad as what it was when we started off this year, or let's say in Feb in March. I think also because what's happened during this period is you've seen some of the initial tariffs that have been announced, get reversed, or a period given to certain segments before the tariff is actually imposed. In case of pharma particularly, because there is a 232 investigation going on to understand the national security risk that US has because of the dependence on other countries, we yet to see as to what really comes out of this investigation, and therefore what would be the kind of tariff. Would it be for generics, branded? Would it be different tariff for different countries? So I think there's a lot which is still uncertain at the moment for pharmaceuticals. On the other hand, healthcare probably it's the still steady earnings, bed addition driven growth. That's been the focus for healthcare. There was a little bit of obviously earlier part of this year news on some of the large conglomerates entering the space and what it could mean for existing players. But again, there is enough room for enough and more bed addition in India given the demand supply gap. So overall, I would say we seem positioned well in healthcare. Pharmaceutical, obviously, we'll have to see what comes out of the tariff noise in the next few months, and I think that will determine stock moves and earnings from here.
Right. For now, though, Neha, does it seem like the tariff chaos is in the price, or do you think there's more to go as and when things unfold?
I think we need to think about what would be the tariff level, right? I think what the stocks are now pricing in is probably a 0 or a 10% tariff, very palatable. You can pass it on. There is some ability to even absorb that. Let's say if the tariff is anything higher than that, obviously then we have to worry about what could be the earnings impact. How much of this would companies be able to pass on to the wholesalers and distributors? Will they actually think about capital allocation decision in terms of moving capacity from India to the US? So I think what the stocks are pricing in right now probably is no tariff or a 10% tariff. Anything higher than that is probably which would worry the street from here.
So that's about tariff. There's another actually element at play when you talk about the entire pharmaceutical industry, Neha, and that would be the China plus one strategy that most of the Indian players are also trying to eye. How much of a big move or fillip will this give to the Indian pharmaceutical industry? And do you think that are we reading too much in between the lines for this?
I think the China plus one narrative was obviously very strong last year when you had the noise around biosecure, which the previous regime in the US was trying to push forward. Obviously, the biosecure noise has completely died down. They weren't able to pass it through, the Congress, or actually didn't get presented. So I think that China plus one, when it comes especially to the CDMO and CRO sector, I think that noise has died down. But I think there is still, I think Big Pharma is still looking at options outside of China just as a de-risking strategy. And I would say that a large part of this narrative actually started pre-COVID, so it's not something, that is, very recent or very new. I guess it keeps going up and down depending on, the stance that US takes on Chinese companies. At the moment, I would say we are probably somewhere, in terms of the narrative, we are probably lower than where we were last year. But I think at the back of the mind, I would guess Big Pharma is still looking at de-risking this strategy just to hedge the risk in case this emerges again in the future.
But do you think generics by far are perhaps better placed or best placed right now, Neha?
So, see, obviously, like I said, the tariff remains the big key for generics. If you were to, let's say, if you have an environment where there is no tariff, no incremental news on tariff, or if there is a small tariff, I think we are still okay. It'll still be determined by earnings, and then it's obviously company-specific drivers that would drive earnings growth. So I think the big question now would be what would be the tariffs for the sector.
Right. So what about CDMO space, Neha? Because of the last 6-8 months, or rather almost a year, that we've been hearing a lot about the entire CDMO space, how it's looking attractive. Everybody's thinking that this could be the next big theme to watch out for in years to come. Do you think of the CDMO space as that right now?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting theme that has evolved in the last year. We have seen a fair bit of activity there. As the big pharma starts reprioritizing the pipeline, as they see pricing pressure, probably there will be a larger need for outsourcing. And given that the entire China Plus narrative that we talked about, if that continues to be at play, then India stands to gain from that. Now, we have to remember that India so far has been more dominant on the small molecule side of the CDMO. The question I think we need to see for it to become larger and, let's say, compete with, Samsung or the other companies, to compete with, the biopharma-focused companies, would we also move into, biologics rather than just being focused on small molecule?
Neha, let's talk about the big fad right now, GLP-1. Tell me, how big an opportunity could this turn out to be for India? Yeah.
So I think GLP-1, you will see it go off patent in India and a lot of emerging markets in the early part of next year. In India, it seems it's going to be fairly competitive. Pretty much, every company is talking about, being there in the market at launch. But I think the larger opportunity is, outside, in markets outside of India, who gets in first there. Also, what would be the market expansion once you see generics, the lower price generics come in, right? Because, while to some extent we do have GLP-1s available in a lot of markets, given the price point they are at, might not be affordable, or to a larger population. So I think it'll be interesting to see, one, what is the competition, what is the pricing it comes down to, and therefore what's the market expansion that we see in emerging markets like India, Brazil, Turkey and other markets.
When you talk about the entire pharmaceutical and healthcare space, Neha, how can you not talk about hospitals? How is that segment looking to you? Are you preferring it right now, especially given the fact that we've just gone past the Q4 earnings season?
So you're right, hospitals have been the way to play domestic healthcare. So to that extent, you don't have the regulatory volatility, the tariff noise in this segment. Earnings have been fairly steady. Remember that this sector has been going through a margin expansion mode for the last 5 years. Because of increasing penetration, COVID, increasing insurance penetration, COVID shifting preferences to more larger chains, which is helping. Companies are, moving to tier 2, tier 3 markets. So it's been a good, I would say, few years for hospitals. We're seeing a little bit of shift in hospitals where they're moving from a consolidation phase to an expansion phase. There is a fair bit of bed addition that's been announced by pretty much every company out there. Now it'll be interesting to see how margins actually graduate from where they are, because most of these companies have seen a significant margin expansion. So how margins move in this expansion phase. A couple of things on expansion. When we look at it, not everything is bunched up. While the numbers seem to suggest there's a large capacity coming in, it's all, staggered. Moreover, companies are calibrating this expansion, so which should ideally sort of limit the margin impact that you would see from this expansion phase. I think that would be the key to watch for hospitals.
Right, so that's all about hospitals. And I wanted to understand what's your view, especially now if you're looking at the entire space. Should one stick to the companies which have this non-rev? Large companies were betting on, it has not transpired the way it has. So do you think it's the right way to look at the entire pharmaceutical space, especially the Indian pharma companies?
I think, Revlimid was large. It obviously contributed meaningfully to earnings in the last few years, and it's well understood. I don't think it's a secret anymore that Revlimid will go away in come Jan 26, and therefore you will see this, margins and earnings come off. But the good thing was that anyways, it was not as if, Revlimid was being given a full multiple, right? We were looking at core earnings or ex-Revlimid earnings, for most of these companies that had the Revlimid exposure. So now what we are seeing is that as Revlimid goes away, which of these companies have a US generic pipeline, have growth drivers outside of generics, where are they using the cash that they are generated out of generic Revlimid to invest in newer opportunities, and therefore what would be their core business growth, which is ex-Revlimid. So I think while Revlimid was a very large earnings driver for the last 3 years, I don't think the street actually gave it a multiple. So to that extent, it's the core earnings which still matter for stocks from here.
Okay, quite a wait and watch pretty much for all sectors, not just pharma. But Neha, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time today.